the problem with the media is that they're very quick to pass from one thing to another. And so they cover the shootings one day and then they move on to a baby being born in Buckingham Palace. It's not like they can sustain something long enough. So it's not that they turn it into a spectacle, it's more like there's an apathy and lack of care at the reality of it. And I think there's a little bit of a surreal quality when the media goes in to cover school shootings. They don't really have enough empathy for the victims. It seems to be a lot of misinformation about the shooter, and the language that the media uses is not strong enough to really denounce the actual event.
We're learning more about the victims of that school shooting. A grief-stricken family said overnight that the 17-year-old young girl that you see right here did not make it home from school yesterday. That's according to ABC News in Miami. Jennifer Gutenberg is the first to be identified as a victim. Jennifer's brother made it home safely. Students described the terror that unfolded in their school, saying students and teachers hid in classrooms and others ran screaming.
I'm terrified for my daughters in terms of the new policies, Trump policies on the limitations of women and women's sort of authority over their own bodies. And then I'm terrified for them in terms of access to guns, and not just in school shootings, but in their daily lives.
The majority of my extended family is in the military in various forms, either the Marines or the Navy. And when I was in high school, a student at the school who was a few years younger than me that I didn't know that well was accidentally shot and killed in his house by himself. He thought there was an intruder in his home, and he was chatting with a friend over FaceTime, and when he thought he heard a noise, he went to his father's room, pulled out a gun, went back to the camera, was inspecting to see the gun was loaded, and shot himself in the head.
I think this time is different, seeing a whole bunch of, 6 and 7-year-olds mowed down by guns. I think definitely targeted people's heartstrings in a way that none of these shootings have before. Reading these obituaries of 6-year-olds is absolutely heartbreaking for people.
As an art historian and academic on Southeast Asian art, how accurately educated would you say the American public is on Vietnam and Cambodian wars during the 1960s and 70s?
I think that genocides overall, and whether they're in Africa or they're seen as distant and isolated from American experience, and often seen as the result of internal politics that don't impact Americans. So I think that they're not taught and they're not educated, when in fact many of the genocides actually have much bigger relations to American policies or are related to worldwide trends, and they're not often identified accurately.
Many in legacy media love mass shootings.
If there are any conclusions to be drawn from this pre-dawn attack, it's this: that the North Vietnamese are capable of coming through South Vietnamese lines like a sieve. Jim Bennett, ABC News, Ben Cat.
In amongst the peace-seeking crowd, there were also hawks, aggressors, troublemakers, anarchists. This was how they showed their peaceful intentions against the outnumbered police.
Coming from Britain too, I saw the Dunblane massacre that happened in the 90s, I believe. After that, the UK banned weapons, right? There are no guns. The special forces and the police have access to the guns in the army, but that's it. And so I know that gun prevention and gun violence and common sense gun laws work.
As far as similarities go between more contemporary protests and historical protests is, I think, the gravity of their size. So protests now, especially with a lot of these gun violence issues and social issues, are getting bigger and bigger every year. They're becoming much more mainstream and being picked up by a lot more people. More people are coming to the cause. I think as far as like the way that time flows between early protests in the 60s and later protests in the 60s for the Vietnam War and race relations. Protests now are starting to have a similar vein in the way that they're growing and the way that they are being perceived by more conservative people in this country.
It's been a long time since America has seen a demonstration such as this. Once again, it's America's youth that is being stirred by certain issues. This time around, again, it's the draft. Now, whether this demonstration is right or wrong is really not the main thing here, but rather that there's a new awareness, a new participation that we have not seen since the late 1960s.
I think more coverage was given to what was going on in Vietnam than the protests. I think there was as much media bias then as there is now. There's some television channels were more conservative and wanting to show less or give less coverage to the student protests and wanted maybe give credibility to the president and believe that the government was doing everything that they could to resolve the conflict. And I think that today television has become much more of a big TV show or a spectacle, and there's much less intellectual or analytical information going on television.
We're gonna keep on moving, keep climbing, keep the faith, baby. Keep the faith, keep your faith.
Is it bad that I know this entire song?
No, everybody does.
You all right?
Yeah, I just got smushed again.
Yep, that's the order of today, I think.
Hi folks, this is Don from Don's Guns. Have I got a deal for you? I'll give you an American-made gun worth $80 as part of the membership. Why? You know why. Because I don't want to make any money, folks. I just love to sell guns.
With the way that school shootings have been represented recently, it's been a very different take. They've been very neglectful in the way that they describe these school shootings, just referring to them as accidents, things that could be prevented, but no one really tries to actually do that. And they never ever use the word terrorism.
We were kind of getting there, like people were dipping their toes in, but I was like, guys, keep going. Baby steps. I know.
The spectacle of the media coverage every time it happens is what this new moment is trying to prevent, right?